All right, so we've gotten to the beginning about the AASP. This is from the user's manual, and standardized tests typically have a user's manual where they have all the information about the test, its standardization, its norming, how to administer it, how to interpret it, etc. So this, at the beginning of the manual, says the AASP is designed to promote self-evaluation of behavioral responses to everyday sensory experiences. So it's a test that you're going to give to yourself. It provides a standard method, we all know about standardization at this point, for professionals and individuals to measure and to profile the effect of sensory processing on functional performance. So functional performance of activities and occupations, right? The profile is most appropriate for individuals 11 to 65 plus years of age and is based on the sensory profile done 1999. So what is the sensory profile? Well, it's a standardized questionnaire. That means that it asks a series of questions, obviously, in a standardized fashion. So they're arranged in a particular order. They cover different like subcategories, which we'll go into. And as I've said, there's two different types. The adult-adolescent, it should be adolescent-adult sensory profile, is a self-report tool completed by the individual. The sensory profile 2 is completed by a caregiver or parent, or possibly a teacher, and it's used with children. Some basic information about the AASP. And I am realizing that my entire slide deck says adult adolescent rather than adolescent adult. So woohoo! I have made an error, and I'm not going to go back to the beginning to change it around. I'll do that in your download. So please bear with me. It is adolescent adult, 2 A's. And it was published by Brown and Dunn in 2002. Winnie Dunn is a huge proponent and expert on sensory integration and sensory processing, has done a lot of work. Very interesting individual. She was at University of Kansas, and now I believe that she's at the University of Missouri. The instrument, of course, measures sensory processing. That's why we looked into that so much right at the beginning of this lecture. There are 60 items divided into, I believe, 5 categories. And the scores fall into these 4 quadrants, which we'll be going over. It is based on Dunn's framework of sensory processing. So she actually came up with a theoretical framework as well. Check out the presenter notes for a whole bunch of information regarding the benefits and the features of the AASP. And this information is directly from the website at PsychCorp. So you can go there, you can look in the presenter notes, but if you're interested, there's more information. Okay. So from the publisher. This costs $159 for a kit. Additional forms are $2.20 per. And as we said, age range 11 and older, published in 2002. Qualification level, a B qualification. So that means that you need a particular set of circumstances in order to purchase this, and Pearson Publishing or PsychCorp would say to give this. And being an occupational therapist and being trained or knowledgeable about the instrument is often what's required. This is typically an untimed test because you fill it out yourself. It usually requires about 15 to 25 minutes to complete. There are norms on it, and the classification system that they came up with is based on the normative information that they got when they were testing the instrument. So they refined it based on the pilot testing. It can be used in a range of environments, including schools, clinics, and other programs. And here's PsychCorp's URL. Again, a fact from Pearson or PsychCorp is below in the presenter notes and some interesting information. What are the purposes of the AASP? Well, the first and probably most important is to measure sensory processing in everyday life, right? That's our cue for occupation. To identify patterns of responses. So it's not just an isolated response, but we want to see patterns. Also to increase awareness for the individual of these patterns, right? So we want to identify them and then alert the person, hey, you have this stuff going on, and to provide information for intervention planning. In terms of psychometric properties, those of you that are interested in statistics will be very interested. Those of you that aren't, please be completing your assessment form and attending enough so that you can identify, is this a quality instrument or is it not, right? So at the end of the day, we're asking you to write down all this stuff so that you can be a discerning consumer and administrator of a variety of tools. So it's standardized and norm referenced. It's a self-report questionnaire. In terms of validity, there's content validity, which, if you'll recall, is how well do the items that are in the instrument actually measure the construct, in this case, sensory processing. How well do they measure that? And in fact, it has strong and supported by literature content validity. There was an expert review of the items and a category analysis, which helps to determine how valid is the instrument. There's also convergent validity, which is obtained by comparing to other tests. So convergent validity means, okay, the AASP says it measures sensory processing, and the adult temperament questionnaire and a skin conductance study also say they measure sensory processing, and the AASP agrees with what these other tools have said, right? Does that make sense? So they're all three trying to measure sensory processing, right? And if they agree with each other, it means that it's more valid because they're agreeing on what does sensory processing mean and what does it include. Interestingly, and I will try to stay on track with this, skin conductance is about when you experience poor sensory processing, you often have some degree of sweating on your skin, and so you're attached to some electrodes that measure the amount of skin conductance and the amount of moisture on your skin that let you know how big is the magnitude of your response to a stimuli, a sensory stimuli that you may find irritating or noxious or threatening if you are sensitive to sensation. So that's what that's about. The reliability, it's acceptable. And how we measure reliability is through something called internal consistency. It's measured by Cronbach's alpha, which is basically a statistical test. And it has acceptable internal consistency. The way that the scale goes is that great internal consistency is 0.9 and above, or excellent. Very good is 0.8 to 0.9. Acceptable is 0.7 to 0.8. So one of the scores falls in there. And pretty okay, fair is 0.6 to 0.7. So we're in that acceptable range. So the AASP authors and developers took two different samples. They first had a pilot sample. So when they were developing the instrument, they were like, I wonder how it works. So what they did is they found 615 people, mostly from the Midwest United States, because that's where Winnie Dunn and Katana Brown are from. 92% Caucasian. Goes with the demographic of the Midwest, potentially, but it's not very representative cross-culturally, right? Ages 17 to 79. 60% female, 40% male, and there was no socioeconomic status data available. So they did all that, then they refined the test, then they did a standardization sample, so a second. So that's pretty good, right? They're doing 2 large-scale samplings to make sure that their test really works how they want it to. The standardization sample was 950 folks, same Midwestern, Caucasian. They divided it into 3 age groups, which is interesting because now we're looking at more at adolescents, young and middle-aged adults, and then older adults. Approximately half and half female and male, and no non-binary in 2002 as a label. And they excluded other conditions. So if somebody, for example, had ADHD, was on the autism spectrum, etc., they said, you know what, we want a sample of typically responding individuals. So sorry, we're not going to include your scores. Actually, they didn't say that to them, but that's the gist, right? Those people were excluded based on probably a demographic questionnaire. There's an article about the sensory processing measure and the patterns of sensory processing from AJOT that is in the presenter notes. So check that out if you're interested. And moving right along. Okay, so you made it through the psychometric and general information. Yay. Now, we're going to connect up the AASP with sensory processing. So now we're into the theory. And this is from the website at Pearson Clinical. And it is contrasting the old and the new kind of visual about sensory processing. So this is for the sensory profile too, but it's the same theory that we use for the AASP. So just notice the old, but go to the new. What we have is 4 quadrants: registration, bystander, RG, seeking and seeker, SK, avoiding and avoider, AV, and sensitivity and sensor, which is the SN. We have also these 2 different kind of scales, right? You can see high on the top and low on the bottom, and passive and active on the sides. Now, do you need to memorize this and understand it after today? No. We're going to go through it in a number of different ways and apply it. You'll be applying it to your own sensory profile scores. So get a general idea, okay? Get a general idea of what does this mean and how does it work. It's a complex system, and it's your first introduction. Here is a little bit more information, and you'll notice it's the same exact chart as the one on the right, or figure, but with some different information in it. So I'm going to let you look at that yourselves. So make note, we're on slide 20, and think about, what does registration mean? Well, you need more input to notice sensation, but you're sort of passive, right? Seeking. You need additional input to respond, and you actively seek, right? So on the left is P, and on the right is A. So P stands for passive, A, active. And registration folks are a little more passive. Seeking folks are a little bit more active in what they're doing to meet their sensory needs. When I first encountered this, what was really confusing is that it seemed like there wasn't a whole sentence to represent what I actually was supposed to know. The H is for high and the L is for low, and that's about the continuum, the neurological threshold continuum. So do you have a low threshold, meaning that your sensory receptors fire really early on, right? And it makes sense. If you're sensitive or you avoid sensation, you're firing early because it's irritating, it's painful, it's noxious. If you have a high threshold, it means maybe you're not registering it, or maybe you're seeking it because you need more in order to actually feel like you're feeling things. So check this out. It's a very handy visual, and we're going to go on and we'll look at it in some other ways. This is for folks that just like to see it without the circles and the bars and the this and the that. It's just a nice clean graphic of exactly the same thing. Notice that they give a term to high neurological threshold called hyposensitivity. Hypo meaning undersensitive, right? And then at the bottom, there's hypersensitivity, which is a low neurological threshold. So it means that your nervous system fires easily. And then self-regulation is the additional term that's added to the passive or active phases or continuum. So another nice graphic, just to add some information. Here is yet another view for those of you that like adjectives and definitions. And again, we're not going to go through this 100%, but notice that the hyper and hypo responsiveness are on here, and also sensory seeking. The one thing I want to draw your attention to is that we have not our sensory avoiders on this chart, but in Dunn's model, we have sensitive folks and avoidant folks. I think that's it for this. Have a look at it. All right. So now we get to the administration of it, right? The nuts and bolts. When you buy the AASP, or if you go to your workplace and they have it, you're going to have three things. You're going to have a self-administration form, which is the thing that either your client fills out, or for this class, you're going to fill out yourself. You have a scoring sheet where you're going to transfer all the scores from the form to the sheet. And then you have a user's manual to help guide you. As I said earlier, there's 5 sections to this test. Number 1 is taste and smell processing. 2, movement processing. 3, visual processing. 4, touch processing. And 5, activity level. So that's how they wound up kind of dividing them. The instructions are as follows, and this is from the user's manual. Please check the box that best describes the frequency with which you perform the following behaviors. Then there's going to be 60 items in 5 categories. If you can't comment because you're not experienced in a particular situation, draw an X. We really encourage people to answer every question. It contributes to the validity of the test. And then write any comments at the end of the section. So if people have more to say, there's an opportunity. It's a 5-point scale, and 1 counts as almost never. And I've abbreviated a little bit here, but check it out. 1 is almost never. When presented with the opportunity, you almost never respond in this manner. Almost never equals 5% or less of the time. Then it's the exact same language when presented with the opportunity. You seldom respond. That's a 2, 25%, 3, occasionally 50%, 4, frequently 75%, 5, almost always, about 90%, 95% of the time or more. So there's this rating scale, and that's how the individual is going to rank the items on the test. Here is just one page. So remember, there's 5 different sections, and this one is the movement processing. Why did I pick it? No special reason, just here it is. To get you to see exactly what it looks like. So there's a number of items, right? I'm afraid of heights. And then on the right, you rank them almost never to almost always using that ranking scale. You rank all the items. The items are numbered. This is 9 through 16. And then all those little squiggles are going to come into play when we score and interpret and put our information into a grid. So stay tuned for that. And you can see they all have to do with various kinds of movement. They, I think, have combined vestibular and proprioceptive. There's bumping, there's riding in a car, which is vestibular, etc. So same setup for all the different sections. Here is another view. This one is the activity level section and the auditory processing section, just so you can see what a whole page looks like.